Holistics. I want to share my knowledge on the thyroid. I've been working with more and more individuals with thyroid complications. I think if you really want to get down to handling these issues, you need to get a little bit of a grasp on thyroid physiology and function and understand how things work. So, most people are familiar with the actual thyroid gland, which is a little butterfly gland that looks similar to this, which sits right below the Adam's apple. The thyroid system at large is responsible for regulating metabolic activity, growth, and development. It's responsible for energy production and acts like a thermostat and regulates body temperature. Now, interestingly enough, almost every single cell in the body has receptors for thyroid hormones. So this is an indication that the thyroid and the thyroid system can actually influence the entire body and the entire system. So let's go into the thyroid cascade so we get a little understanding of how things work. First of all, we'll get some type of neurological input or some type of stress, some type of feedback loop that will tell the brain that we need more thyroid hormones or more metabolic activity. So the hypothalamus will secrete thyrotropin releasing hormone, which will go down to the pituitary, which will secrete TSH or thyroid stimulating hormone. Thyroid stimulating hormone will go down into the thyroid gland, which will activate TPO, which is an enzyme called thyroid peroxidase, which will actually oxidize iodine so that iodine can combine with thyroglobulin so that it can create a cascade which will eventually create the thyroid hormones T4 and T3, or thyroxine and triiodothyroxinine. Now, T4 is secreted in significantly higher amounts, as indicated by the ratio here. So the thyroid's producing or secreting predominantly T4, and then to a limited extent T3. But T3 is about 4 to 5 times more active. So we'll see in a little bit that down here the conversion from T4 to T3, which happens in other areas of the body, is highly, highly important for metabolic function, for thyroid function. So what happens is these thyroid hormones connect with a thyroid binding protein. These thyroid binding proteins, whether it's thyroid binding globulin or albumin or prealbumin, act like little taxi cabs which actually transport and deliver the thyroid hormones to the target cells. We'll come back to the target cells, but the first thing that we'll cover is T4 to T3 conversion, which is highly important for maximizing or optimizing T3, which most of the cell binding sites and most of the cell receptors have a high affinity for. So over here is the conversion. So for T4 to T3 conversion, you need the enzyme 5-deiodinase, which is actually a selenium-dependent enzyme. So if we have a deficiency in selenium, then there could be problems, so we have to obviously look at that within the diet. As mentioned before, the thyroid secretes mainly T4, illustrated here about 93%, and then the thyroid produces about 7% T3. Now, most of this goes down into the liver, so the liver is massively important for conversion. About 40% of T4 conversion in the liver is going to get converted into T3. About 20% is going to be converted into reverse T3, which is an inactive form of T3, which will be essentially eliminated and excreted through the system. Now, another 20% will be metabolized into these byproducts, which will go down into the gastrointestinal system, where if the body has enough beneficial gut flora, we will then have potential conversion to more T3. So you can see right away that just the liver and the gastrointestinal system are extremely important for thyroid production, thyroid conversion. Another 13% will be converted into peripheral tissues, which is the muscles, bones, brain, nerves, etc., etc. So now we get maximum amounts of T3 to the target cells. So on a cell level, we're coming over here, where we're getting mostly T3, about 90%. You have about 10%, which is a little bit active, but we're going to think mainly about, or focus mainly on T3. So in the cell, in the nucleus of the cell, T3 is going to enter and connect onto a receptor site on the DNA or close to the DNA and actually have it and create a gene expression. The gene expression is going to create gene transcription, which is going to create mRNA or messenger RNA, which will eventually lead to RNA translation and then eventually synthesized proteins, which will then activate the mitochondria. There's also research suggesting that T3 will have direct receptors onto the mitochondria, but regardless of that, what we have is the activation of what's called mitochondriogenesis. Now, this is the activation of the mitochondria, which is the increase of size and number of the mitochondria. This will essentially create our metabolic activity, hopefully within the trillions of cells within our system. So it's affecting our whole body, hopefully. From a basic level on the cells, basically we have a metabolic effect, and we have an increased oxygen consumption. So what happens for energy production is that in the presence of oxygen, glucose and food products can actually enter the mitochondria and go through two metabolic processes, which are the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain, which will create optimal ATP production and optimal carbon dioxide and water production. And that is what's basically involved in efficient energy production. However, in the absence of oxygen, glucose and other food products cannot get into the mitochondria, and they go through a process of anaerobic, or without oxygen, anaerobic glycolysis, or fermentation, in which case lactic acid is produced. Lactic acid is inflammatory in large amounts and was an inefficient way of producing energy. So you can see how important the thyroid is for energy production. Other metabolic processes will be turned on, so it's going to increase glycogenolysis, gluconeogenesis, lipolysis, protein synthesis. Some other systems that are involved are the CNS and the PNS, so the central nervous system, or the brain and the spinal cord, will go through development and maturation. The peripheral nervous system's highly correlated with the autonomic nervous system, which is our involuntary nervous system, which is highly connected with the cardiac system. So with metabolic activity, we see increased cardiac output, increased heart rate, increased respiration. You also get activation or growth and development of the musculoskeletal system, activation of the hormonal system, the digestive system. So there's a lot going on a cell level just from the cascade and conversion of thyroid. So you can see how important this is for overall health and how it's affecting the whole system, and why a lot of people can be experiencing a whole host of different symptoms, over thousands of different symptoms. So this is a foundational basis of what's going on with thyroid and what's going on the cell level. So I hope you guys learned a lot. I know it's a lot of information, a lot for me too. But if you're curious for more, check us out at freshholistics.com. Till then, keep it fresh. Peace.